Okay, so welcome everyone to our webinar. We're so excited to be with you all this afternoon. A couple of housekeeping details. So many of us are webinar veterans, so this goes without saying. We'll be sharing with you tomorrow the recording of this webinar, as well as a couple of other materials. We know that you come to this webinar with tons of questions, and so please use the Q&A box to share questions. Where possible, we'll try to answer them. If it's super specific or if it is uber speculative, we may not be able to answer the question at this point. But again, welcome, and we're just so excited to be with you today.
So again, I'll join Bob also in welcoming you. I'm Lisa Carlton, the CEO of College Matchpoint. And what we wanted to do this year is really take some time to review the admissions results from UT Austin. We are going to be talking about what we've seen in our practice, what we've seen from data released from UT. So we're excited to share the information we have with you all. Our team has been working with students around the UT application for many years, about 15. The majority of the students that we work with are not auto admits, and they're often applying to competitive majors. What we know about this is that we can share with you the trends that we've seen this year, and some of the trends we've seen are trends that have been growing over time. But the one thing to know about UT that I just want to put as a little asterisk is they make a lot of changes. And so you can't predict for sure that this is how it'll go next year, I guess is what I want to say. Bob's going to be sharing all the numbers with you. You'll see that it was an incredibly competitive year. And so we'll give you some insight there, but I do want to say that we can't at all guarantee this will be the way it is again next season. We're proud to have our team. As I said, I'm Lisa Carlton, the CEO of College Matchpoint. Bob Carlton is the other principal of College Matchpoint and a senior consultant. And Allison Randall is our managing director and educational consultant and UT Whisperer. And so we are happy to begin to share the information that we know about UT with you all.
Okay, as Lisa mentioned, what we're going to do is walk through the results we saw from this year's admissions trends. And a proviso, as Lisa said, these are specific to the University of Texas this year. Your mileage may vary in terms of year to year, how things change, but this year was truly a remarkable year for the University of Texas in terms of undergraduate admissions. They saw 66,000 students apply for undergraduate admissions. This was a record high for the University of Texas at Austin. And over the last 3 years, like so many other schools, they experienced application inflation in ways they never imagined. UT Austin had a 20% increase in applications for undergraduate admissions over the last 3 years. Now, this year had a specific driver for that application inflation. Apply Texas has, up until this year, been the single platform that students could utilize to apply to the University of Texas at Austin. This time last year, UT Austin, in tandem with Texas A&M University, announced that they would be accepting applications on the Common App, the application platform that is most commonly used by schools to accept applications. And like many other large public universities, the first year that they went to the Common App, the University of Texas saw a significant increase in applications, a platform that made it comparatively so much easier to add UT Austin to the school. Now, the materials that a student has to provide, still a significant effort, But this year specifically, with the addition of the Common App as an application platform, UT saw a significant increase in applications. There are three other drivers of this application inflation. The first is the growing popularity of the University of Texas on a national basis. We always say this to parents who are Longhorns, parents who went to undergrad or graduate school at UT. The secret is out. This is a national profile school. So Princeton Review annually does a survey of 12,000 seniors in high school. And one of the questions they ask them is, what are the dream schools, the schools that you are most excited about on a national basis? UT is the 10th most popular school among students nationally. The top three are schools that you might imagine. UT has become a national profile school. In addition to that, there are two other significant drivers of application inflation at UT Austin. The first is that the school continues to have a test optional policy. Prior to the pandemic, some students would have a test score that they're not particularly pleased with. And so they would see that test score and they would see the sort of bell curve of UT Austin test scores, and they would decide not to apply because their test score wasn't on par with the UT academic profile. Test optional has radically increased the students who say, I don't have to submit test scores. And as a result, I'm going to go ahead and apply to UT Austin. And then finally, students across the state of Texas are applying to more schools, not just UT, but more schools in state and out of state. This past year alone, the state of Texas saw the largest increase in applications from high school students across all schools. And you can imagine UT, with its popularity, is one of those schools that more and more in-state students and out-of-state students are choosing to apply to. So what's the impact of this application inflation? Many of you are aware of the auto admit policies at the University of Texas at Austin. Students that are ranked in the top 6% are guaranteed admissions to the College of Liberal Arts. They are not guaranteed admissions to a competitive major like engineering or computer science or business. And 75% of the incoming class at UT Austin are auto admit students. This year, application inflation dramatically hit the non-auto admit students. For non-auto admit students, UT Austin reported a 12% admit rate for non-auto admit students. An admit rate that is frankly on par or pretty darn close to some of the Ivy League schools. And this is even more competitive when you drill it down to specific majors like computer science or business or engineering or nursing. Now, for non-auto admit students, they will see CAP options, a program that UT offers to guarantee admissions to some school in the UT system. But for non-auto admit students, which oftentimes makes up disproportionately the largest percentage of students applying to UT Austin, that overall admit rate is radically different, not just from when parents like us applied decades ago, but from students as recent as 4 or 5 years ago. The other place that this application inflation is really having an impact are these competitive majors. Frankly, where UT Austin routinely says there are more competitive majors, not just overall majors, but that UT Austin has more students applying to be a computer science major than they have seats. And so as a result, these competitive majors are impacted by application inflation, not just for non-auto admit students, but for auto admit students who list engineering or business or nursing as their first choice major, because in that case, they are still read competitively for that major. Lisa, quick
Yeah,
question.
one thing I wanted to add here is that as more of the top 6% students apply, they tend towards these impacted majors, okay? So what happens then is that these majors especially are heavily filled with top 6% students, if that makes sense. So as these numbers rise that Bob is talking about, that impact on these very popular and difficult majors to get into increases at the same time, which is, you know, what he's saying. And so we see that because that top 6% pool starts to fill that up. And when we say top 6%, we're only talking about schools that actually rank their students, okay? So your student could be at the top of a non-ranking school. They're not in that group. So let's talk a little bit about how UT evaluates an applicant. I think people always find this kind of shocking. And I know when I started as a consultant, I also found it shocking. I'm like, how can a school this big have so many pieces to an application and actually review it? But I'll say, after having been in this for this long, they really do. And so we're going to talk about what this looks like and what we're seeing right now. So the test optional world has shifted things a little bit. Grades and rigor are in and of themselves are critical in the read right now. So, but it's especially important that the student has high grades and rigor in courses that match with their major. So as an example, if a student wants to be pre-med, they probably need AP biology, right? So if a student wants to be business, they need to go math all the way through calculus. If they want to be engineering, they need to probably go through calculus BC, okay? They're really looking at, does your coursework match your major? And you're going to notice a thread here, a word that you're going to, I bet if someone put a little dot thing on this, it's going to be said a lot of times during this webinar, and that is the word major. UT is basically reading this with making a case for a major, okay? So grades and rigor, super important, especially in those courses that match up with the major. Resume, again, it's got to show fit to major activities. And I would say leadership. UT has always liked leadership, and we see that continuing. And when Allison talks about resume, she can talk a little bit about the different kinds of leadership that's available, because it's not always like everybody's got to be student council president or something. It's pretty broad. The essays, and again, the most important essay in the stack of essays is really not the personal statement at UT. Honestly, at a lot of schools, but UT especially, it's the major essay. That's where the student is making that case. Test scores, if a student has it, we have seen quite a lot of students get admitted without test scores. And one thing to note, just historically, that we've known about UT is that they never put a ton of weight on test scores, even prior to the test optional. Now, what we don't know is if that'll continue or not. And then finally, letters of recommendation. Most big state schools don't take letters of recommendation, and UT does, and they actually read them. And so one thing to notice is you've got a lot of places to show your strength. So a lot of opportunities, if you will. But it is important to understand that all of these things are coming into play in that read. And I would say, don't underestimate any of these, but especially the top three. I mean, a resume at UT is an incredibly important thing. And Allison will talk about that a little bit later and go into detail about that. But sometimes I think people don't understand you might want to be spending as much time on your resume as you do on your personal statement, because it's really important. So that's how UT reads reads your profile. They're going to get your transcript, right? And just as a reminder on a transcript, we have a lot of different types of rigorous coursework. So I'm just going to review kind of the hierarchy, if you will, of the transcript. So the most rigorous courses a student could take, if they're available to them, is IB courses. Okay, those are considered the most rigorous. Next is AP courses. And then followed by that would be dual credit, and then on-ramps, and then regular courses, okay? So one way for a student to stand out is to take the most rigorous coursework. Now, most schools don't have IB, so you don't need to worry about that. It's just what's available to you. But taking rigorous coursework and doing well in it is incredibly important, because that transcript, sometimes students will say, oh, well, I got really good grades, but there's not a lot of rigor in it. You kind of got to have both, for at least around in the areas for the major. So as you're looking at your transcript, you want to kind of evaluate yourself and say, okay, does this match up with what I'm saying that I want to major in? That's really important. And many of you are starting to make class choice decisions, and we have been meeting with lots of students in the last few months on class choices. And we always lead with, okay, let's look at what you could take that would show your major. It would show things that match your major. And where we see students having a harder time this year when it comes to transcript is students who are not able to make some course choices that match up with major. So students who are at schools that have a wide range of coursework sometimes have an advantage over schools that have maybe a more traditional course offering.
Lisa, go ahead.
Yes, Allison.
So students often will ask me, okay, so I'm applying to UT. UT is really important to me. That means I should take all the on-ramps classes, right? Because UT will favorably look upon my transcript when they say UT on-ramps courses.
Oh, such a good question. So on-ramps is not considered, it's not in our hierarchy of rigorous courses. It's not the most rigorous courses, nor does it play any role in a student getting into UT. It's really an agreement that a school district makes with a set of professors. It's a way in the teacher shortage to get some additional teaching. I've seen students who've had really good on-ramps courses, but in that hierarchy, it's not at the top. And I sadly do think that it's sold to kids that way sometimes. And so that is a great question, because no, I don't see that happening at all. Bob, what questions do you have?
Yeah, two other questions, Lisa, on transcript. How many AP classes should a student take to get into the University of Texas at Austin?
Great question that I'll never answer, but I will answer. I mean, you can't give a number, but here's how I would say I would make that decision, if that helps. Number one, I think something that students think is that, well, if I get extra points for it, then I can get a B, and it was hard, so I really got an A. UT's not looking at that way, and neither is any other college, okay? An A is an A and a B is a B. But you will get some points for rigor, but it's still, when they're looking at your grades, an A is an A, a B is a B. You really should, if you're going to take rigorous coursework, feel like you can make an A in it, or at a minimum a high B, okay? I see way too many students getting low B's and C's in rigorous coursework, and that is a blinking red light to get out of that class and get in a class that's maybe more appropriate to your skill level at that point, because that's going to hurt students across the board. the other thing, Bob, I would say about your question is, again, sort of sound like a broken record, but like if you are, if you are, say, an engineer, you should be taking a rigorous physics course, a rigorous, your sciences should be rigorous, your math should be rigorous. So it's not so much how many, or if you want to be an English major, you need to have your English and your history, those kind of liberal arts pieces strong. So does that help?
Yeah, it sure does. And then the last question, can you differentiate from a UT standpoint between GPA and transcript?
Well, I would say so GPA is important at UT because each school is taking the top 6% of the GPAs, and those students are auto admit. So if you're young, if there's anyone on here younger, anyone that has younger students, the easiest way to get into UT is be in the top 6%. It's just not easy to be in the top 6%. That's the problem, right? So, I recognize that, but that is like your best path is to start young and try to get in that way. Other than that, they're really looking at your grades and then kind of where you fall in the class. Okay. I will say a trend that we've seen the last 2 cycles, and I don't know if it will continue, which we weren't seeing before. Okay. So this is a shift, is that those students right under the top 6% have tended to do pretty well. So if you're like, I had a student who was 6.9, a horrible place to be. But we did notice that those kids that are like, top 7%, even into 8, like that did help them. So I would say it's both your GPA and then also the numerical grade that you're getting, kind of taking it apart, because they're taking things out like your non-core classes, right? So that's where when they start evaluating you in a holistic way, you're going to lose some of those classes. Testing is the great unknown right now for UT for next year, okay? So we don't know if they're going to stay test optional or not. They've been test optional for a while. We've all been surprised that they haven't announced. I hear through the grapevine that they're getting ready to announce pretty soon, but you hear those things and then it doesn't happen. So we'll know when we know is what I would say. I think at this point with test optional for students in general and for UT, I wouldn't assume that they're going to stay test optional. I really genuinely feel 50-50 on this. I don't know. So I would be preparing, if you're a junior, to have a test score, because I think that's going to be true with all the schools. I think it's going to be, mix and match, especially in the southern part of the world. The one thing I would say about it is that I don't anticipate UT making, scoring the test score as like the main component. That hasn't been the way they did it in the past. And I would say they have been true to their word on being test optional. And we've seen quite a few kids get in test optional, and that's really gone across majors. That has not just been, and that's been from engineering to CS to all the majors. So, but I do think students probably should be preparing for a test score is going to be important, but what's going to happen, we're all going to have to stay tuned.
Lisa, how does a student go through the process of determining in fall of their senior year whether or not to submit a test score?
Oh, such a good question, because I think it's a little different here than most colleges. So UT, again, I told you we were going to say the word major 1,000 times. So if you don't have one, you need to get one if you're going to apply here. Is that UT actually pulls the parts of the test score that relate to your major. So let's go back to my engineers, the science and the math, if they're an ACT kid, is what's going to show. So they're really looking at primarily at that part of the test that relates to the major. So you have to look at your scores and It's hard with UT because when you look at their middle 50% of their test scores, it's including those top 6% students who probably didn't, if they were UT or bust, may not have spent a lot of time prepping because they didn't need to. So typically the score needed is higher than that. But I will say we have seen huge variances in scores getting into UT from much lower than one would anticipate. And we've seen kids with 36s not get in, right? So, but again, if you're trying to consider if you're going to submit to UT, you're going to want to primarily look at how strong are you in the parts that match up with your major.
Great. As Lisa mentioned, if there's a hashtag for UT, it is this very UT-centric term that is called fit to major. They have been an innovator on this, and nationally, other schools have followed UT into this focus on fit to major. In surveys, parents and students routinely say that they view a primary objective of college as preparation for a career. So UT, when a student applies to UT, they list their first choice major. Now, for auto-admit students, second choice major is a meaningful input. For non-auto-admit students, the most meaningful choice is that first choice major. And as Lisa has said, you can think of the entire application as a case for that first choice major. We encourage students not to think of being admitted to UT Austin, but think of being admitted to McCombs or Cockrell or to the School of Architecture, because that's the way the application read goes at UT Austin.
And one thing that was interesting that we saw this year that we have not seen in the past, because there's always these little micro trends that start happening and you're like, that's interesting, is Bob is absolutely right that really, if you're not in the top 6%, it's really a bullseye on a one major. In other words, the second major is on there, it doesn't count. We did see for the first time, and we've been doing this for 15 years, a student who was just right under the top 6% did get a second choice major. So I think we do notice that a little bit of shift in how they're treating those kids under that. And we did see that also in the major choice. But let me say this, that's like 1 out of a bazillion. And that means you're like 7%, 7.00 or something. Other than that, no one is getting their second choice major. And so that is really an important piece to note.
One other comment at a high level on fit to major. Students, particularly when they become juniors, become really motivated to understand what is the test score range or GPA or admit rate for these impacted majors, these competitive majors. To date, UT has not consistently shared those statistics. McCombs in the past has included them in information session presentations. Cockrell, computer science typically have not. We'd all love to get those statistics, but any of those statistics right now are speculative. They're not precise. Now, for many students, particularly sophomores and juniors, they begin to factor in this sort of choose your own adventure strategy. Are you UT or bust? My family is 8 generations of Longhorns. We bleed burnt orange. Or are you focused on major? You are specifically keyed to being a communications major or a computer science major. This is a decision that cannot simply be put off until fall of senior year. We find that many students are making this choice as early as spring of freshman year. If you're planning to apply to computer science, they are looking for a really, really intense level of engagement. And that cannot all be in summer before senior year. So this choice is a crucial choice. Now, historically, up until a couple of years ago, students had an option to say, I'd like to join UT Austin, but then I'd like to have an opportunity to discover my major while I'm at the University of Texas at Austin. That door was shut a couple of years ago. It was called undergraduate studies. There are some specific undeclared options within 3 of the schools, but it is important to understand, even in these 3 cases, the student is still making the case for fit to major.
And I
Now,
think that it's important to note here that when they got rid of that, I do think it was a very honest, maybe fair thing to do, because as Bob said in the beginning, they were the leader of this fit to major. That's how we're going to evaluate their students. And so I think that they really did come down to, we're really not just an open door to be fully undecided. Like, we're probably not your school if that is where you are. And so there's part of me that feels like I think they made that change, what, Allison, 2 years ago?
2 years.
I think that was them just showing their hand at being honest and transparent about how they are evaluating.
one of the considerations that we always encourage students to do, and I was just meeting with one of our sophomores earlier today on this, is to look at their aptitudes, skills, and what motivates them. And then not to simply go with the first brand name major that comes to mind. Well, I want to be a business major. Why? Do you want to count money or make money? Are you interested in finance and accounting? Or are you interested in management and marketing? If you're interested in management and marketing, you may actually be a communications major, not a management major, because you're interested in helping corporations communicate. Okay. And so one of the things we encourage students to do, UT Austin has a spectacular research tool for majors called Wayfinder, is to really go deep. This past year, I worked with a student who applied to the Arts and Entertainment Technologies major. They are thriving. 2 years ago, I had a student who applied to informatics. They just love it. That informatics student thought they were a computer science major. And then they realized, I do not want to code for a living. I want to inform people who code for a living how to make software. So again, look at these broad alternatives and these exciting majors.
And one of the things that is a trend at UT, and I see it happening more and more every year, which is a phenomenal opportunity, is that they have so many additional minors and tracks and all these different ways to add things onto your major, so that in the end you can create quite a robust major. For example, if we look at the communication school, they have a sales track that where you're training to work in sales in tandem with McCombs. McCombs offers a minor. There's a accounting one that goes with economics. So really the strands that they offer run deep, and I see them this is something that has increased a lot. And so I think Bob said something that's so important. We're in a moment where people want brand name colleges and they want brand name majors. I think you can differentiate yourself sometimes by getting really creative, because it's amazing the things you could pull together for a major at UT and get really, really stand out in a pool with some great quality. So I encourage parents. This is where I think it's easy to, when we all went to college, this was very different. And to dig in a little bit and do your fact finding to see the multiple options that might be there that might open more doors for your student and possibly even be a better option for them. And this is a place where I think UT compared to other schools has really done a phenomenal job, but I don't think many people sadly look at it. So that would be a trend that's happening there, because they know, like Bob said, these majors are impacted. There's not enough seats. It's not that they don't want to take more students. It's like, that's all they have room. There's no room at the end. So that's why they are trying to find these different pathways to help students have other ways. As good consumers of college, I think it would be a worthwhile exercise to look at some of those for sure.
So one of the things that when we've talked a lot about fit to major, and there's a lot of different opportunities that the University of Texas gives students on how to demonstrate that in the application. The first of which is, well, we talked about the first of which is that transcript, right? Where students can start to differentiate themselves and demonstrate their exploration and fit to major through the courses they choose. Then another place which gives students a wonderful opportunity is the expanded resume. I want to highlight that I personally wish we would change the name from resume to engagement inventory, because it is very different than kind of what people think of when you think of a resume. And so one of the things that is important to note about the expanded resume, the expanded resume is unique to UT Austin in that they really want an exhaustive list of how a student has engaged outside of the classroom from the summer before 9th grade all the way until they graduate. And they literally want to know all the things. So it could be, yes, the traditional activities that we think about, extracurricular activities, sports, clubs. It also could be kind of random and innovative hobbies, like someone who decided to take apart a computer to see how it works. Literally, when we work with students on this, on the expanded resume for UT, we literally talk to them about what are all the things you do when you're not sitting in a classroom. And some of it might happen at school, but some of it might just be something you're curious about. And that, in fact, actually has a place on the expanded resume for UT. It could be 4 or 5 more pages, right? And that's because it isn't just a list of, maybe as you think about what a resume is in the work world, it's really about kind of achievements and measurable outcomes. For the expanded resume for UT, it's really, in addition to the what students have done, it's also about how they've done it and what they've learned. And so it's as process oriented as it is outcome oriented. And that is why the length kind of can get to that. One of the things that I think is so important to think about for students within fit to major and in activities that are beyond fit to major is this is a story of engagement, and it's an opportunity to show initiative and impact. And so initiative, it doesn't have to, a lot of students feel like, if I have to demonstrate initiative, I need to start a nonprofit. It could be inviting one person to a club. That's initiative. That's something that no one told you to do, but you just did it. And then anytime someone takes initiative and it makes an impact on one person, 3 people, 5 people, this could be, wow, we were all really struggling in that on-ramps pre-cal class. And so I actually got a group of us together so that when we went to talk to the teacher, we were all there at once so that everybody could get their questions answered. That's initiative and impact, right? And you didn't have to start a nonprofit. They were just trying to figure out how to learn better, right? So one of the things we know in terms of fit to major is that to be competitive, especially in those highly selective, highly competitive majors, a student is really going to need 3 to 4 pretty robust activities that demonstrate skills, knowledge, and experiences that directly relate to that major, okay? So this is in addition to coursework. And so like Lisa mentioned, the hierarchy of rigorous coursework, there is a bit of a hierarchy in terms of fit to major experiences, the most impactful of which tend to be internships. And an internship for a high school student, again, I wish we used a different word because it gets confused with, what internship means in the business, in the kind of outside of college world. But for high school students, we're talking about an experience that's 1 to 2 weeks per year, 10 to 15 hours a week. It does not and almost never is paid. And it doesn't need to be for Google. It could be for, a small company or a nonprofit. And likely it's probably related to a family member or a family member's professional network. Because otherwise, why would they let a high school student in there? And it's typically, it involves a lot of shadowing. And I would say just about every student I know who, no matter what their internship is, somebody asks them to help with social media. So that always ends up being on the menu, whether you're a communication major or not. But it's really the impact of that experience provides the student with an opportunity to explore their desired major in a professional setting, develop those professional skills, and really dig deeper into the specifics of what that actually means in the day-to-day. It can help confirm a student's path. It can also redirect a student into a different path, which again is not bad. Students often feel like, well, if I do an internship or I do a shadowing, then it has to work out. Well, sometimes it helps you learn what you're really interested in, right? I went in wanting to observe dermatology, but I came out on the other side really being interested in the business of healthcare. Like, that's not bad news, right? And so the key with a resume that we say to students, in addition to those fit to major experiences, is to really think about, in addition to the basics of the activity, say you were a varsity soccer player and you weren't a captain on the team, but you did work really hard to integrate the freshmen into the team, not because you were the captain and not because the coach had asked you to, but because you really noticed that they weren't feeling connected, and so you did something about it. That not only is initiative and impact, that's leadership. And so that's something else that this resume gives students the opportunity to demonstrate and to share. This can often be something that parents and other adults need to remind students that they do, because a lot of this kind of, this kind of special sauce of how this student interacts in a group is probably, a lot of times it's not conscious. They're just connectors, and they're just people that want other people to belong, or they're the people that want to make harmony. And so sometimes it's hard to see that about yourself. And it can be really helpful for the adults in a student's life to say, wait, everything you do, you always invite someone else, or everything you do, you're always interested in making sure everyone feels included. That's literally the kind of stuff that could end up on this resume. Bob, Lisa, anything else to add?
I might add that I think if there is one part of this application that people are missing an opportunity, it is this. And it takes a lot of time. I mean, on our team, we take so much time with our students on this, and it just takes a lot of time to do this well, but I always think that UT, while it is a really hard place to apply, on the other hand, they're giving you so many opportunities to show who you are. And I think the problem is that sometimes people don't know that they need to take that opportunity to do that, or they, as adults, we all say, oh, I mean, I don't know how many times I've been called by a parent who told me their students' resumes too long because it's longer than one page, which they're right if they're applying for a job. However, we're not, and there's the word expanded on this, right? But we don't all know that. I agree with Allison. I wish it had another name. One other little micro thing I would mention here is that when you might be looking for an internship, a question I get so often from people is, could my student work in my business? Yes, some of the most successful candidates that I have had apply to UT did work in their family's business. They actually really did something also. it won't help. None of this will help if it's just fluff stuff, because they're asking for too much detail. So you've got to be able to actually talk about it, which is why I do believe, I mean, I think if our company has a theology, it is engagement. And so the reason that this is great is kids who do this stuff tend to feel good about themselves and the things that they did. And so I think that there is a lot of positive that comes from this, but don't think that you've got to call up Google, like Allison said. Stay in your little network, if you will, and see where opportunities might rise, because the student is more likely to get actual experience in here in the area where you actually, whether it's your company, your relatives, a friend, something like that, they're more likely to get to actually do something, and actually being able to do something is going to help in what they communicate.
The other thing I would say that we have been noticing more in the most recent admissions cycle is that it's almost kind of drilling down a little bit more into leadership, and really leadership that deeply impacts the positive experience of others. So leadership that actively contributes, where students are actively contributing to the communities they belong to, and inspiring and empowering other people to succeed. That is definitely something that if a student is doing that, whether they're doing it consciously or not, the place for it is this resume. And we have seen, we've noticed that more and more, I would say, every year.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So the next place where you have lots of space to demonstrate and share who you are with UT is in the essays. And it's really about figuring out how all those pieces fit together. Currently, we don't know if this will continue to be the case, but in the past 2 admission cycles, there have been 3 specific supplemental essays for UT Austin in addition to a personal statement. The personal statement is really that opportunity to tell a story that demonstrates unique positive qualities about the student, right? And we always like to map out all of the essays for UT so that we see that the personal statement isn't going to tell the same story as the major essay, right? So think of it like a mosaic where you want each piece to shine, making sure that before you pick your story for the personal statement, you've decided what you might write for those other 3 essays so that you're making sure you maximize kind of that application real estate. One of the things Lisa mentioned was, even though the personal statement is the longest one, and it's the one you tend to hear about most in the media, for UT Austin, it isn't necessarily the essay that makes the biggest impact. One of the essays we believe probably makes the biggest impact is that essay about why this major. And yet this is an incredibly important piece of writing where a student gets to share how they have grown and reflect on that growth.
One other observation, particularly for parents, it is tempting to consider these personal statements as a marketing piece. The God honest reality is that people who read these essays are looking for specificity. They're looking for an explicit student voice. A shiny, happy essay is never going to tell that story. It always needs to be an essay that uniquely only that student could write.
So again, figuring out the balance between kind of how to maximize that essay real estate in the application. It's really important, because they are going to read that expanded resume, that these short answers not be utilized just to regurgitate that resume, right? A student can 100% refer to activities on their resume, but this, again, just like the personal statement, these short supplements are not cover letters, right? They're going to read that. They're going to read that resume and know about those activities. And so these essays are a time to go deeper and to talk about growth and learning and initiative and impact in a way that shows that the student is thoughtful and deliberate and intentional about how they explore what they do when they're curious and how they impact the learning of others. Specific examples are key here, which is why those activities are so valuable. So while you're not regurgitating the resume, you certainly can talk about how that internship that you did, where you shadowed the nurse, really helped you realize the value of communication skills in that profession, right? And this is another opportunity where every single one of these essays, you have the opportunity to specifically demonstrate exactly how you will engage at UT and exactly how you will contribute in and out of the classroom to the learning of others, the learning and success of others. Always, this is like free real estate for you to say, not only have I done X, Y, and Z, and am I this human, but guess what? I've already thought about exactly how I'm going to plug into UT Austin and exactly how I'm going to positively contribute to the success of others. For all of these, again, we're building a case for that major, right? I want to talk about, yep, go ahead.
These are the 3 short essay prompts that the class of 2023 was requested to complete. The short essay prompts for the class of 2024, so the current juniors who are applying for fall 2024 admissions, as of yet have not been released. So Allison is going to talk you through what we saw in terms of the results from this year's class. And then once the new prompts are updated, obviously we'll always look towards that. But Allison, can you talk about this year's prompts and what you saw in terms of the impact for the students who we worked with?
Absolutely. So again, in that first choice major essay, the specific experiences that students had related to that major and kind of the so what of those experiences to the student were incredibly powerful in this process. And so it wasn't just what the student did related to the major, but what they learned when they did it and where that led them. That was really important. It's almost like the journey that the student took exploring that major and being thoughtful about kind of how that informed their next step in exploring that major and how all of that will impact the specific way that they maximize the resources at UT Austin and positively impact the learning of others. In terms of leadership, this essay, what we saw was, again, it's an opportunity for students to share not just experiences where they have led others, but how they have positively contributed to and impacted a specific community. It's almost like what we saw was students who were able to identify, here's a thing about me. I am someone that can, I'm someone that can talk to anyone. So in the classes where in all of my classes, I make sure everyone feels included. Well, that isn't the kind of leadership that might come to mind. You might think you need to be like the varsity football captain. That's the kind of leading that really seemed to make an impact this year for students. And then in the third prompt, please explain how you will change the world after you graduate. No pressure. This was something where students had the opportunity to identify a common good cause that they were deeply passionate about and connected to, and then demonstrate how they had already identified resources at UT that would help them further that, whether it was including others, whether it was engaging with professors who were doing research in that particular topic, whether it was classes or courses, and as always, identifying how the students would contribute along the way to the positive experiences of those around them, especially when they were going to involve them in this cause that they were already so passionate about, was really seemed to be impactful this year.
Yeah, I think what Allison is highlighting here is a trend we're seeing at UT and really across admissions, but UT has gone so far as to put a whole prompt about, how are you going to transform the world? Again, I think they're pretty transparent in kind of showing you what they're looking for, right? So for those of you who are freshmen, sophomore, even juniors, you have time to do some of these things. Reading these prompts and knowing, like she's saying, that there is this shift towards wanting to see how you make other people's lives better. Some people in college admissions are calling it character, like that they're trying to evaluate your character. So it could be useful as a backwards resource to look at some of these things as you're thinking of things you want to do. Now, of course, I want to say this again, doing things that you're just doing that you have no interest in will show, you can smell it a mile away. So it has to be things you genuinely want to do, but this can give you some guidance, because many people say, oh, do they even read the essays? Yes, they read the essays. They especially read, what we know is they especially read the short answers. They read the short answers more than they read the personal they weight them higher. Okay. Honors programs this year. The honors is very competitive. There's many honors programs at UT. We have quite a lot of students who apply to Plan 2, and we were thrilled this year with so many of them getting in. It is highly competitive. So I don't know the exact number now, but I'm guessing it's in the 20%, I would think, low maybe. But there are other multiple honors programs. I think, again, it isn't the like straight A perfect 36 that's getting in here. What we see, and this has been a trend happening with UT for a while, it's that student who can, we've talked a lot about all these different places where you've got to put all this information. So it's that student who can reflect on all the things they've done that I think makes a great UT candidate. So it's not just having a laundry list of stuff. It's doing stuff and being able to communicate in a resume, in essays, in these different places, and then letters of rec, other people communicating about you, about those things. I think that's what makes a great UT candidate. That's why we call it holistic admissions, right? And it genuinely is. In the honors program, I think that's just ramped up. And I would say they're also looking at your intellectual curiosity a lot, and with the questions that they ask. We do with our clients have them, many of them will apply to honors programs. It is a way to get another read, which is always great. And I think the honors programs at UT are phenomenal. And there's so many of them. So it's rich with a lot of different, but I would say that a successful UT candidate typically is going to be a very engaged student who has an ability to reflect. So if reflection is difficult for students, that's something that you could work on at the dinner table. There are ways to learn to reflect. And so I think while we're saying you've got to have all this stuff, you got to have it, and then you got to be able to know how to talk about it. And I think that's the other place where kids struggle in this process, is it's so much information to get out, right? So that's a lot. The final thing is timeline for UT. They have a priority deadline, which is November 1st. If you, at least if you walk around Austin, Texas, and I think all of Texas, you see everybody has a different opinion about when you should get UT in. College Matchpoint tries to have our students get it in by Labor Day, and we've had great success at UT, so I'm going to call that a win. I've also seen students who sent it in right before that November deadline and right before the December deadline and gotten in. I do think there was a day when the date mattered more than it matters now. It's a lot of work. And so I think knowing that this is not something you want to rush through, especially if you think about the economic impact of a UT getting admitted to UT. The economic impact of getting into UT, when you look at college tuition across the board, is quite significant. And so putting the time and the effort into this to make sure that you are presenting your best foot forward is really, really, really important. And so most students are going to need to work on this over the summer so that they could have that in. The priority deadline is a nice thing, November 1st. So that's what we recommend in terms of time frame. There are certainly those people that want to have it in on August the 2nd, which is often difficult because the prompts don't come out till August 1st. So there is that. But I would recommend it's something that needs some time and space.
Are there any, we are at the time stop and folks have been so great with questions. We're going to leave this open for one more minute in case anyone has a question. If you're dropping off, please remember we'll be sharing these materials with you in a follow-up email tomorrow. It looks like we have gotten to the end of the session. So it's just been a joy to be with all of you. We appreciate your time and please let us know if we can help in any way.
And don't forget to tune into the basketball game.
The Longhorns are currently beating Miami 45-37 at halftime.
Oh, nice, nice, nice.